Hi all, welcome back to the screencast. In this video, we'll be doing user authentication and session handling. So let's get started. We'll first check the HTML which we'll be using for the login page. So as you might be aware of all web applications, the way they work is if you're not logged in, they ask you for a username and password. You can create a new username and password and you can log in to the service using the username and password. Our login form is this one and the sign up form is this one. So we have a username, a password and a submit button. The name is username password. Again, for the sign up button we have name, username, password and email. So we are not taking any other information from the user for the sign in function. So what we would do is we'll first check if the user is currently logged in or not. If the user is logged in, that is we do have a session of the user on the server, then we'll redirect the user to the home page. If the user does not have a session, then we'll ask the user to log in, and after the user logs into our machine, then we create a session and the user is able to access our service using the session that she created. So the first thing we need to do is add the logout function to our main function. So we already had a login function and we would be modifying this login func as we go ahead in this screencast, and we have this logout function. So basically login will enable the forward slash login forward slash route which will log the user into our system, and logout would log them out of our system. So now making changes to the home function. So there are a lot of changes. So let me just change them and we'll see. Since we are going to create a complete database package, session handling package, will be needing to we'll be needing to delete this login function because it will create a problem. Now let's talk more about the modified home function. We only are going to support the get request for the home function. The first thing we do is fetch the username from our current sessions. So there is a package which we created called as sessions. So this is the package sessions. It uses Gorilla sessions, the library, and it creates a cookie store. Cookie store basically would be storing multiple cookies. Now sessions are nothing but cookies, and what we do is we have a session object on the server, and we have the cookies on the client. And what we do basically, so sorry for that. So what we do is we'll be storing the session information on the server, and we'll be doing the same on the cookies, and that is on the browser. And when the user will log into our web service, then we'll be checking the cookie with the this object session. So we have defined two functions. Both of them are exported. The first one is logged in. So it basically checks if the user if the user has an active session or not, and get current username, which will what we I mean we have a session assigned to a username. So what get username get current username would do is, whenever the user logs into our web service, will be reading the cookie which the HTTP request gives us, and based on the session ID of that cookie, we are going to identify the username of the user. So where will we use this function? It is used practically everywhere, like here. So when we want to populate the home function, we first fetch the username and we then pass it to get pending functions. Is logged in is exclusively used in the login function. So let's check that. So that was a sessions package. So what we'll have to do is, so we have to make a sessions and then create a sessions.go and write this code inside that file. This would be a file inside the DB package. You can really give any name, it doesn't matter, but for the sake of simplicity, give the name user.go. So we first import the log package. We have uh, three functions. The first function is create user. As we saw, we use task query function, which is a wrapper around which is a wrapper around the prepare, create transaction, and commit and rollback. It takes an SQL statement. It parameterizes the username, password, and email. And this create user function will be called from the view which is going to handle the sign up function. In this screencast, we are not going to actually write the code for sign up. I'll leave that as an exercise for you, since we basically know all the concepts behind it. So you just have to use this function. Now valid user. What valid user will do is it will check if the username and password combination which the user enters is correct or not. We have a db.query method and we then fetch the data. So earlier when we saw the db.query method, we use the for loop. Here we don't need to use the for loop because we don't have more than one records. What we are doing over here is we are selecting the password from the user table for that given username. So obviously we are, since the username is our primary key, we are going to, not exactly primary key, it is a natural key. So we are going to get only one record as an output. So we'll just use an if clause. So what will happen is, when for the first time the rows dot next would be null and this block would be executed only once, and we save that password into password from DB and we check it. Now this is a very simplistic application, so we don't have any cryptography done. But in a real life application, you would have to do a SHA or some other cryptographic function on the password and not store it in plain text like we are doing. It is a horrible practice. Now coming to get user ID basically returns the user ID of that username, and it will be used. We'll see that. Now coming to the session views, this is a file called as session views inside the views package, and it will contain the functions which pertain to session handling, which are login and logout. Now, what happens is when we use login and logout functions, we have to manage that. I mean, there will be very few URLs which would be accessible by the user publicly, and most of the URLs would be for the users which are going to log into our system. So, say you want to mark a task as complete. You can't do that without logging into our web service, right? So, that's why what we have to do is there are two approaches of handling that. One is by using middleware, and one is by actually checking if the user is logged in or not inside each function. The second approach is quite verbose, and that is why we are not going to do that, and we'll be using middleware. What I mean by middleware is that say my home URL should only be accessible via login. So I created a function requires login which takes a handler. Okay, so what it will do is the request object which will be passed by my router would first be passed into requires login. Now let's check the logic of requires login. Requires login takes a handler as an input, and it returns a handler uh, a handler. What it does is it will just check if your session is logged in or not, and it returns it, and basically it calls the handler. What this will do is enable us to handle the login logout functionality. I mean restrictive viewing functionality in the least amount of code. If we were not using this function, which also is called a middleware, then what we'll have to do is we'd have to copy paste this function call everywhere in every view which is a restrictive view. But thankfully Go supports functions as a first class data type, so we are good to go. So that is done. Requires login. Logout is simple. First you check the store object for a session value, and if the value is logged in, if it is not false, then mark it as false, save it, and then redirect the user to login. Because by default when a user logs out of our machine, sorry, not machine, web server, then they should be prompted to the login page. The login functionality is a bit verbose and different from logout. So the first thing we do is we try to find out a session, then we check if there is an error. If there is an error, we execute the login template. uh, Ideally what we would need to do here is show some message to the user that okay, something went wrong or something like that. We haven't included that yet, but I leave that as an exercise to you, because it is a very interesting, it is a very interesting thing to work on. Now, there are three ways of calling this login function. One, I can use the get method, which is supposed to return the HTML page of the login page. Second is post, which is supposed to uh, get the username password, verify, and then log the user into our service, and then redirect it to the home page. And any other method should basically tell the user that, I mean, you're not allowed this method onto the login function. So we give status unauthorized when we redirect to login. Since we want the user to have a good experience with our application, we give the status as unauthorized, yet we route the user to the login page. So maybe then they can give a basic post request rather than giving something else. Usually when we get a different different HTTP method, then it is not a genuine user, because most of the users use a browser, and browsers don't randomly send out HTTP requests. Only malicious users will get this status unauthorized header. Okay, so one more thing over here is when we call the session save, if you noticed, the first argument is R and second argument is W. So we can understand over here that when we set the logged in value as false, this logged in is going to be stored on a cookie, and its value is false, and the save does exactly that. So on the W, it will write a cookie, I mean, it will update the cookie to false. We'll see that in action just in a moment. Now we don't need these two things, so I removed it because there'll be syntax error. Now we need to import the time package, and we need to read the login template, since, I mean, we have copy pasted the HTML, but we still have not created the login template. And after creating the login template over here, we need to just look the template up, and we need to import the sessions package which we created. So after doing that, we need to remove the hard coding of the username, and we are good to go. Uh, you can see over here on the home function, if the method which we get the request, I mean, if the requests method is get, then what we basically do is we get the username from the session, sorry, from the request which accesses the cookie of the request. Then we get the pending tasks for that username, and we set a CSRF token, and we set an expiration of the a cookie, and we set a cookie. The cookie has name as CSRF token and value as ABCD. So CSRF is an attack in which the user sends us cross cross domain form request. Say you have a login form, and this login form calls forward slash login forward slash. So it basically calls your domain name forward slash login. I can easily give domain name abc forward slash login. So what this form will do is it will send a post request to another domain. So that is a CSRF attack. And to mitigate that attack, what we need to do is that we need to have a CSRF token. Now, this is a very rudimentary way of handling a CSRF token. You are you are encouraged to use a ready-made function like some other package if it provides CSRF functionality. But a simple way of CSRF token would be that we'll populate the HTML template. So we have a hidden field on our form whose name is CSRF token, and we are going to populate that using context.csrf token whose value is abcd. Then we set a cookie by name of csrf token and the same value. And uh, when we get a form submission, we check the request for a cookie called CSRF token, and we check the CSRF token HTML field. We get both of those values and we try to equal check if they are equal. If they are equal, only then do we insert the data inside our database. If they are not equal, then we ignore the request because that is not a valid request. If either of the CSRF token is corrupt or different, then there is some malicious use, or say the data corrupted when before the user got it or before we got it from the user. So we are basically good to go as of now. Let me try and run this. For those of who don't know, ampersand in Unix and Linux, what you can do is you can uh, concatenate two commands by using the ampersand utility. What it does is it will run the second task only if the first task is successful. So let's go to Firefox. Cool. So when I go to localhost 8081, since I have sorry, this home function, so I went to the home function, and since we are required a login, it routed us back to the login function. So let me just quickly log in. If you're using the data dump that we saw in an earlier video, then the username and password is Suraj, Suraj, Suraj. Now I logged in, so let me just show you cookies. Or better, be inspect element. No, we'll just see the cookie itself. You can see there are two cookies of the domain localhost. I don't remember if I have covered this till now, but always stored cookies are always stored according to the domain name. So cookies are quite secure unless we accept, I mean, unless we allow people to access the cookies. So what we can do over here is there is this send for field of a cookie. Currently it is set to any type of connection. So even JavaScript, we can access this cookie via JavaScript if you know the syntax. What we can do is we can set HTTP only as true inside our cookie call. What it will do is it will make the cookies accessible only to HTTP, that is only to our server. And here we are just using localhost, but if you were to host this somewhere like alphabet.com, so your cookies would be bound to alphabet.com, and only those people who are in control of alphabet.com's web application would be able to read the cookie. So that's the deal of cookies. Cookies also have an expiry date, and they get auto expired unless we renew them. I feel that using Gorilla sessions is better, because what Gorilla sessions will do is when you log into the web server, and the cookie session is about to expire, it will automatically extend the session. So we are saved from the hassle of playing with cookies. But it is helpful to basically understand the functionality of cookies. So you can see that the cookie name is CSRF token, the value is ABCD, and the cookie name is session, and the value is something extremely huge. I won't remove this cookie because I want it. Okay, so that is the login functionality. So let's see the completed one. Or yeah, basically, I mean, uh, here we don't care about the login logout state when we go to other views. So what you'll have to do now is copy paste this, I mean wrap all these views inside views that require login, all views except this login view, because we want that login, we want we want the user to log in only if the user is not logged in currently. Okay, so that is about all. I mean, that is all about our authentication and cookie handling. You can log our. I mean, this is the log which was generated, and you can see over here. See, log.print username is authenticated. So the user Suraj is authenticated. So this was it about user authentication, and now I would recommend everyone to sit down and study the DDL which we shared and to perfect this app. So think about what features you can add. I mean, you'll first have to add the features which are missing, like fetching tasks according to category, fetching according to the status, adding a category. We are yet to show the add, I mean, how to add to the database. We'll be checking the last part into the last video, which is the next one. So until then, stay tuned for the next video and thank you for watching.